teenage boy with no medical degree saved a billionaire's pregnant wife on a flight, but what he asked for afterward left everyone speechless. It was 11:47 p.m. when Flight 722 took off from Hartsfield-Jackson bound for Los Angeles. The sky outside the plane was pitch black. Most passengers were already half asleep, cocooned in thin airline blankets, headphones on, tray tables up. But in seat 17A, a teenage boy sat quietly, upright, hands resting on a black nylon backpack zipped all the way to the top. His name was Jaylen Cross, and if you asked anyone who knew him back in Birmingham, they'd probably tell you the same three things. He was smart, he was quiet, and he always kept to himself. Jaylen had just spent the last 3 days at the National STEM Futures Conference in Phoenix, representing his high school, Jefferson Tech Academy. It wasn't the kind of place people usually noticed. The computers were old. The science lab was basically just a closet. But somehow, Jaylen stood out. Not because he raised his voice, but because his projects worked. Always. His backpack held the certificate he'd earned for placing second in the Junior Engineering Showcase. But what made him prouder than anything else was the moment when one of the panelists, a retired NASA engineer, told him he had the mind for systems. Jaylen didn't quite know what that meant, but he liked how it sounded. He looked out the window at nothing. Just stars, scattered like sand across the sky. In the row beside him, a man was snoring. Across the aisle, a baby let out a sleepy whimper. The air was dry, the lights were low. Everything felt still. Then came the voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are expecting some light turbulence ahead." Jaylen leaned his head back. He wasn't worried. Planes shook sometimes. It didn't mean anything. He just wanted to get home, show his mom the certificate, and maybe, just maybe, print out that college scholarship list she'd been nagging him about. But what Jaylen didn't know, what no one on that plane knew, was that in about 20 minutes, something would happen that would change the course of his life. And someone else's too. Because 3 rows up, in first class, a woman had just shifted in her seat with a strange look on her face. She was about 7 months pregnant. Her name? Tessa Hawthorne, wife of one of the richest men in America. But for now, Jaylen sat alone, in 17A, not knowing that fate was quietly rearranging its pieces behind the curtain of night. But when the silence broke, it did so like a glass hitting concrete. The jolt came hard and fast, like the plane had hit a pothole in the sky. People stirred. A few gasped. Someone cursed under their breath. The seatbelt signs pinged overhead as the plane dipped just enough to cause coffee cups to tip and stomachs to rise. Jaylen's eyes opened wide, but his body stayed still. He glanced at the flight attendants, no panic in their faces yet. That usually meant it was fine. He'd read somewhere that watching the crew was the best way to tell if you should be scared. But then came something else. A noise. Not from the plane, but from up front. A sharp cry. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like pain. Flight attendant Cynthia Ramirez, working first class, dropped her tray of drinks and ran. A murmur spread through the rows. Something was happening. Jaylen leaned out into the aisle, craning his neck. He couldn't see much, just a tangle of heads and movement near the curtain. Then another sound came, this time a man's voice. "Someone help! My wife. She's pregnant. She's not breathing right." It didn't register at first. People don't expect emergencies at 30,000 feet. Your brain tells you it's not real, that someone's overreacting, that someone will take care of it. But the voice came again, more desperate. "She's shaking. Somebody do something." The cabin shifted from confusion to alarm. Passengers unbuckled against orders. People started standing, looking toward first class. Phones came out. The man yelling was tall, red-eyed, in a rumpled gray hoodie, Clint Hawthorne. He was holding his wife's hand, trying to steady her as her chest rose and fell too fast. Tessa looked like she was slipping. Her eyes kept closing, her lips pale, her breath short and sharp like someone sprinting. Cynthia was on the intercom calling for medical assistance. No doctors on board, a couple of nurses, but they weren't sure what to do. One tried to help, but backed away after fumbling a blood pressure cuff. Panic started to take root. Jaylen's heart was thudding now. Something pulled at him. He didn't even think, just unbuckled and stood up. He'd never been in first class before, never even walked through it. He moved quickly up the aisle, brushing past knees, bags, and elbows. People gave him odd looks. Who was this kid? Clint looked up, frantic. Are you with the crew? Are you a medic? Jaylen shook his head. No, sir, but I've trained for this. I took emergency response classes back home. Please let me see her. For a second, Clint hesitated, then he stepped aside. Tessa was slumped to the side. Jaylen knelt next to her, scanning, checking her pulse, her breath pattern, asking quick questions even as she struggled to speak. What's your name? He asked. Tessa, she whispered, eyes fluttering. How far along are you? 7 months. He could tell her breathing was shallow, fast. Her skin was cool. It could have been a panic response, but combined with the pain, the tight stomach muscles, and the shortness of breath, Jaylen suspected it was something else. He looked up. We need her on her side, right now. And get me something to elevate her legs, anything. Blankets, coats, whatever. Cynthia scrambled to grab items from the crew cabin. Another attendant brought oxygen. Jaylen gently turned Tessa on her left side. Ma'am, I know this is uncomfortable, but it's going to help the baby. Clint was trembling. You're just a kid. How do you even know how to? I'm not guessing, sir, I promise. But the real test was still ahead, because Tessa's condition wasn't getting better, and time was running out. The cabin felt smaller now. What had started as a flight full of strangers with earbuds in and eyes closed was now a collection of worried faces craning toward first class, whispering and wondering what was going on behind that thin curtain. Jaylen didn't hear any of it. He was focused. Tessa's breathing was getting worse. Her pulse was thready, too fast, too shallow. The pain in her abdomen hadn't stopped. She kept grabbing at her stomach, her fingers clutching at her sweater like she was trying to hold something in. Jaylen glanced at the closest flight attendant. I think she might be having something called a placental abruption. The placenta might be pulling away. It's why she's losing breath and why she can't calm down. If we don't keep blood flow to the baby, The attendant stared. How do you know that? I studied it in our EMT training back home. We practiced emergency childbirth scenarios too. I can try to slow it down, but we need a doctor on the ground. Can the pilots contact emergency medical? She blinked, then nodded. I'll tell them now. Clint stood behind them, wringing his hands, pacing in a 2-foot space. His wife, the mother of his unborn child, was losing strength in front of him, and a teenager was the only one keeping her from slipping. I can't watch this, he muttered, stepping away, one hand on his head. Jaylen looked up. You being near her helps, even if you don't know what to do. Just talk to her. Remind her she's not alone. Clint returned to his seat, knelt beside her, and whispered, Tessa, you gotta hold on, all right? Remember that beach in Oregon? You told me this baby was gonna kick just like the ocean waves. You said we'd name him Hunter, or maybe Kira. Remember? Her lips moved slightly, as if trying to form the words, but nothing came out. Jaylen reached for the oxygen mask. She's fading. We need to prepare in case we have to land early. Cynthia returned a few seconds later, pale and breathless. The pilot said they're coordinating with the tower and Flagstaff. Emergency landing in 20 minutes. 20 minutes might be too long, Jaylen said, adjusting Tessa's legs again. We need to get her body to push blood where it matters. Another passenger, a woman in scrubs, probably a nurse, stepped forward. I've never seen anything like this on a plane, she said softly. Jaylen didn't look up. Ma'am, if you can monitor her pulse and keep the oxygen going, I can stay focused on stabilizing her breathing. She nodded quickly, and for the first time someone seemed to recognize that Jaylen wasn't just a kid. He was in control. Clint looked over at him again. You really from Birmingham? Yes, sir. Born and raised. What do your parents do? My mom works 2 jobs. My dad's not around. Clint exhaled. So all this you learned on your own? Jaylen paused, then said, Some people wait to get trained after they lose someone. I decided to get trained before that ever happens. Clint didn't respond right away. His eyes welled up. The world he lived in, billions of dollars, private jets, and smart homes, suddenly felt paper thin. And here was this boy from Alabama, holding his wife's life in his hands, with nothing but knowledge, guts, and heart. But just when things seemed to stabilize, Tessa's body gave a sudden jerk. And that's when Jaylen knew the real fight had only just begun. Tessa's body stiffened. Her eyes rolled back for a split second before fluttering shut. Jaylen's stomach dropped. She just seized, the nurse said sharply, checking her pulse. Still there, but faint. Cynthia's voice cracked over the intercom, calling for everyone to remain seated as the pilots accelerated their emergency descent. The whole plane shook, dipping in altitude, triggering a new wave of gasps and murmurs from the cabin. Jaylen leaned in. "Ma'am, stay with me. Just breathe if you can. In and out." Tessa's lips parted slightly, barely. Jaylen wiped sweat off his forehead with his sleeve. He was kneeling on the floor in first class with strangers looking down at him, but the only thing in his mind was keeping that woman alive. This wasn't a test. It wasn't a simulation. There were no do-overs. Just this moment, this chance. The nurse handed him a towel. What now? Jaylen's hands moved fast, using the towel to cool her forehead. We have to reduce her stress response. If she seizes again, she could go into preterm labor or worse. Clint looked like he might break. Is she dying? I don't know, Jaylen said honestly, but I'm doing everything I can to stop that from happening. He looked around quickly. I need sugar, juice, candy, anything. Her body's probably in shock. It might help buy us a few minutes. A man across the aisle tossed over a protein bar. Jaylen broke a piece and gently pressed it against the inside of Tessa's cheek. Sir, he told Clint, I know this is hard, but I need you to talk to her again. Just your voice. Anything you can say that reminds her what she's fighting for. Clint nodded, then leaned down close. We're not done yet, Tess. You promised we'd watch that dumb cooking show when we landed. You promised you'd teach me how to braid hair in case we had a girl. He choked back a sob. I don't care about the money, the company. Nothing means a thing if you're not in that delivery room. Jaylen glanced at her again. She blinked. Faint, but it was something. Jaylen felt a tiny surge of hope. I think she heard you, he said quietly. But hope wasn't enough. Not up here. Not at this altitude. He turned back to the nurse. We need to get her into a side-lying recovery position. Just slightly, not too much. And raise her feet again. Can you help me keep her propped while I talk to the pilots? You're going up front? The nurse asked. I have to. We can't land in Flagstaff if their hospital can't handle a preterm birth and emergency trauma. That could cost both lives. Before anyone could stop him, Jaylen moved past the curtain and toward the cockpit. A flight attendant reached for his shoulder but paused, something in his eyes stopping her. The boy wasn't panicking. He wasn't out of his depth. He was steady. He knocked twice, then the pilot's voice came over the door speaker. Who is it? My name's Jaylen Cross. I'm a passenger, but I'm also the one helping the woman in first class. Her condition's worsening. If Flagstaff's not equipped, we need another option. There was a pause. Then the co-pilot responded. We'll check what resources are available in Prescott and Phoenix. Stay by her side, son. We'll do the rest. Jaylen turned back and jogged to his seat beside Tessa. Her fingers twitched. Clint grabbed her hand. She moved again. Jaylen nodded, kneeling back down. That's good. Keep her awake if you can. The nurse gave Jaylen a long look. You should have been a doctor already. Jaylen didn't respond, but inside all he could think was, he wasn't even sure if he'd make it to college. Until now. 10 minutes to landing. That's what the crew said, but it felt like 10 years. The plane had started its descent, but every second that passed, Tessa's breathing got shallower and her skin got colder. Jaylen never left her side. Not to drink, not to rest, not even to think. His body moved on instinct now, remembering drills from his emergency response classes back in Birmingham. He checked her pulse again. Still there, but barely. The oxygen mask was slipping. He adjusted it with one hand while steadying her body with the other. Ma'am, he said gently, you're almost there. Stay with us. Tessa gave the smallest nod. Clint wiped his eyes. She's still fighting. Because you're here, Jaylen said, and because she knows what's waiting for her down there. Then came a bump. Sharp and sudden. The plane dropped a few feet, causing Tessa's eyes to flutter. People screamed behind the curtain. The pilot's voice came on. Brace for landing. Jaylen looked up at the nurse. Keep her tilted. Just a little. We need blood flow to the baby right up to touchdown. The nurse nodded, her hands steady even as her eyes betrayed the nerves. Clint grabbed the seat to balance himself. What happens when we land? They'll meet us on the tarmac, Jaylen said. Paramedics will take over. But will they? I don't know, Jaylen answered, his voice low but firm. But I think she's got more fight in her than she lets on. The wheels hit the runway hard. The whole cabin jolted. Luggage shifted overhead. People screamed again. Jaylen shielded Tessa's body with his arm as they slowed, metal groaning beneath them, tires skidding. Then it stopped. Silence. No engine roar. Just breath. The doors opened within seconds. EMTs in dark uniforms flooded into first class with stretchers and bags. One of them, a black woman in her 40s, knelt beside Jaylen. "You the one who kept her stable?" she asked. He nodded. She gave him one long look and said, "Then you might have just saved 2 lives." They moved fast, lifting Tessa onto a stretcher. Her eyes were open now, barely. She tried to speak. Jaylen leaned in. "Don't talk. Just rest. They've got you now." Clint walked beside the stretcher, still gripping his wife's hand. He turned back toward Jaylen. "Come with us." Jaylen blinked. "Sir?" "Just come." Outside, the cool Arizona night met them on the tarmac. Sirens blinked without sound. Tessa was loaded into the back of the ambulance. Clint turned to Jaylen one more time. "You coming or not?" Jaylen glanced at Cynthia, the flight attendant, who simply gave him a small nod. So he climbed in. Inside the ambulance, Tessa finally found her voice. She whispered, "You're not a kid. You're something else." Jaylen sat beside her, still clutching her hand. "Just someone who listened in class," he said. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just class that brought him here. It was something more. And that more was about to be tested all over again once the hospital doors opened. Prescott Regional wasn't a large hospital. No glass towers, no helipad, just 2 floors, a parking lot lit by buzzing halogens, and a staff that looked as stunned as everyone else when the ambulance doors burst open. The EMTs rolled Tessa through the ER double doors. One held an IV, another barked vitals to the nurses waiting inside. Clint never let go of her hand. Jaylen trailed a few feet behind, unsure if he should keep going. He wasn't family. He wasn't even old enough to vote. But no one stopped him. Not after what he'd done. They rushed Tessa into a labor and delivery room, shutting the door tight behind her. Clint stood outside, his hand trembling as he wiped his face. Jaylen leaned against the wall, his legs finally catching up to the exhaustion. His knees felt like jelly. He hadn't eaten in hours. His hands still smelled like rubbing alcohol and fear. A nurse came out, clipboard in hand. "Is he the one who stabilized her?" she asked Clint. "Yeah." She looked at Jaylen for a second like she was trying to make sense of what she saw. Just a teen, wearing worn-out sneakers and a black hoodie with the logo of a public high school. "I've never seen a civilian, let alone a student, do what you just did on a plane. You kept her breathing, you prevented shock, and you likely stopped that baby from being born in the sky. You understand that?" Jaylen shook his head slowly. "I just didn't want her to die." She nodded gently. "Well, thanks to you, she didn't." Then she disappeared through the swinging doors again. Clint sat down on a nearby bench, elbows on knees. "Jaylen, right?" "Yes, sir." Clint wiped his face again, then looked up. "Do you know who I am?" Jaylen paused. "I mean, kinda. People talk about you. You're the guy who sold that solar thing to Tesla. Big tech company, right?" "Yeah," Clint said. "Big tech. Big pressure. Big everything." He looked down at his wedding ring. "But you know what felt the smallest tonight? Me, useless. All that money, all that power, and I couldn't even hold her upright without panicking. Then you showed up. Quiet kid from Alabama, no degrees, no doctor title, just guts and grace." Jaylen didn't say anything. "I owe you more than I can even put into words," Clint added. He pulled out his phone. "Whatever you want. A check, a car, a full ride to any school. Name it. I'll make it happen." Jaylen looked down at his own worn backpack sitting by the wall. Then he looked up and asked calmly, "Can you build a computer lab?" Clint blinked. What?" "A lab, at my high school, Jefferson Tech. We don't have working machines, no decent internet. We learn from textbooks printed before I was born." Clint sat back, floored. "You're asking me to build a lab?" "I'm asking you to build a future," Jaylen said, "for kids like me who might save someone else one day, if someone just gives them the tools." Clint didn't speak for a few seconds. Then for the first time since they met, his eyes filled with tears, not from fear, not from stress, but from something deeper. "Yeah," he whispered. "Yeah, I can do that." But what Clint didn't know What none of them knew was that this small moment would spark something far bigger than just a tech lab in Birmingham. The next morning, the news broke. It started as a local blurb on a small Arizona station. Teen helps save pregnant woman during emergency flight landing. But within hours, it was everywhere. CNN, NBC, Reddit threads, Twitter hashtags. By noon, Jaylen's name was trending. Reporters camped outside Prescott Regional, hungry for a quote, a photo, a soundbite. But Jaylen? He was still in the hospital waiting room, eating vending machine crackers, wearing the same hoodie from the night before. Tessa was stable. The baby was safe. They'd stopped the abruption in time. And Clint? He kept his word. 2 hours after the emergency, his assistant was already emailing school administrators back in Birmingham. He didn't just want to donate equipment. He wanted blueprints, a team of engineers, a permanent endowment. Jaylen sat across from him in the waiting room, legs crossed, trying to process everything. "You really gonna do all that?" he asked. Clint looked up from his phone. "Already started. Your principal's in shock. Told me this lab's been a dream of his for 12 years. Jaylen nodded slowly, still chewing. "Why'd you ask for that?" Clint asked. "Most people would have asked for college money, a new car. You could have had anything." Jaylen swallowed, then said, "Because I already knew what I needed. But other kids don't even get the chance to figure that out." He paused, then added, "There's this one girl, Monique. She's in my robotics club, but she works the register at Waffle House every night just to pay for parts. Smartest builder I've ever seen. Nobody talks about her, nobody helps her. But if she had the tools, the space, I swear she'd invent something that changes the world." Clint stared at him. "You talk like you're 40. Jaylen shrugged. "I see what I see." Across the hall, a nurse poked her head out. "She's asking for both of you." Jaylen stood. Clint walked beside him. Inside, Tessa looked exhausted but calm, propped up in a hospital bed. Her face had regained some color. Tubes and monitors beeped around her, but she smiled as soon as she saw them. "Look at you," she said, voice soft. "Our hero." Jaylen flushed. "I didn't do it alone. The nurses, the crew—" "No," she cut in gently. "You made the call. You took the risk. You walked up front when no one else did." Clint reached over and touched her cheek. "He saved you. And our kid." Tessa turned to Jaylen. "What's your plan now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Get home. Finish junior year. Maybe look into scholarships." Clint smiled. "About that. How do you feel about Stanford?" Jaylen blinked. "Stanford? Or MIT, or Caltech. Whatever you want. I'll make calls." Jaylen smiled, but then said, "I appreciate that. Really, but you already gave me what I wanted." Tessa grinned. "This kid is something else." Clint chuckled. "Yeah, he is." But what neither of them saw coming was what happened next. Because when the story went viral, people didn't just watch. They started to act. By the end of the week, Jaylen's world looked nothing like it had before. Back in Birmingham, Jefferson Tech Academy was buzzing with energy, real energy this time. Local news vans parked outside. Reporters set up on the cracked sidewalk in front of the old school building. The same halls Jaylen used to walk in silence now echoed with talk of national attention. And in the center of it all, the construction crew had already started tearing down the old computer room. Clint Hawthorne didn't just fund a lab, he funded a movement. He flew out top engineers from his company, hired a local black-owned construction firm to handle the remodel, and donated an endowment that would sustain tech programs at the school for the next 20 years. All because one boy, on one flight, had asked for something bigger than himself. Jaylen stood outside the school on a Tuesday morning, watching a crane lift metal beams into place. His mom was next to him, holding his hand tight, even though he was already taller than her. "You're not the same kid I dropped off at the airport," she said. Jaylen smiled. "I'm still me. But now the whole country knows your name." He paused. "They don't need to. As long as the kids in here get what they need, that's enough." She kissed his cheek. And that week, the letters started coming. Emails, handwritten notes, messages from kids in Detroit, Oakland, Jackson, Newark. Places just like his, filled with students who'd never had a chance, now inspired by someone who looked and talked just like them. A school in St. Louis named their new science wing after him. A robotics club in Tulsa sent a video of their team chanting, "Do it like Jaylen." Even a teacher from Alaska wrote, "Your story reminded me why I started teaching in the first place." Jaylen didn't chase the spotlight. He didn't care about interviews or praise. But what he did do was visit every classroom at Jefferson Tech, one by one, quietly, just to tell the kids two things: you matter and you're needed. The new lab opened that spring. State-of-the-art everything: 3D printers, coding stations, solar panel models, AI bots. And on the front wall, in bold blue letters, the name, the Jaylen Cross Technology Center. Clint and Tessa flew in for the ribbon cutting. She was 8 months pregnant, glowing with health. When asked what they'd name their son, Tessa looked at Jaylen, then back at the crowd. "We'll let him tell that story someday." Jaylen shook his head with a grin. "That's too much." Clint laughed. "Not enough, if you ask me." That afternoon, after the crowd cleared and the cameras left, Jaylen sat alone in the new lab. Just him and the machines humming quietly. He looked at the rows of computers, at the empty seats that would soon be filled with kids ready to learn. And he thought about that flight, the smell of metal, the panic, the weight of someone's life in his hands. It didn't feel like heroism. It felt like doing the right thing when no one else would. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. You don't need money, fame, or a big title to make a difference. You just need courage, heart, and the will to help, especially when it's hard. If you got something out of this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes, they sit quietly in seat 17A.